Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of Ados podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. This is episode 14. I'm your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from Reuters, the New York Times, the Washington Post, New York Post, and WWMT Channel 3 CBS News, West Michigan. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and interview the article entitled Special Report, Thousands of U.S. Judges Who Broke Laws. Oaths Remained on the Bench.
Personality. Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question that forces us to have personalities.
Okay, what questions do you have for us this week?
Let me frame this first, as Yvette would say. Beyonce got her American ADOS wake-up call recently, where Africans from the mainland essentially told her to stop using their culture and depicting them in a native caricature way. They say they are more than the men and women from the bush, which oftentimes she uses those images where everyone is around a fire and grass skirts and paint on their faces and they're dancing. Africans say they are just like any other modern society. They wear Gucci, Prada, and drink Starbucks, and go on to describe how Western they are. So they are telling a Western woman to stop showing them in one lens. I get it. And Yvette spoke on this, that we fantasize Africa as only being bush and Sahara, or Wakanda even, as she puts it. And I agree, Beyonce needs to stop. You are American. There are plenty of images she can use of ADOS. But what I find hypocritical is to say, show our diversity, not just one image, but simultaneously not showing your own culture, but Western culture. It's almost like they want us to see their decadent veil because they've watched ours for decades. They don't want us to see them poor. Is that hypocritical?
It's complicated. This is a difficult area to go through, because if we praise artists for being artists, they are going to borrow from many sources. The other side of that is a lot of those sources are going to be based on levels of indoctrination we've all been impacted by. So I understand to generalize Africans as not wanting to be typified into being what the Europeans created to justify their colonialism as savages, barbarians, people that cook people and are horrible, monstrous types. So I understand that. We hated Tarzan too. So that's where there is connection. But it's an understanding that's a European view of us. And we are, all of us, in different levels struggling to rise above and come out of it. At the same time, there's going to be a portion of the population that has bought the Prada as standard, as identifying themselves and them being civilized. That too must be challenged, and good artists are doing that work. At the same time, on the whole, no, they're not being hypocrites. They're doing what we have done in America in establishing our identity and self-woman and manhood within the context of white domination racism. That's why this is always going to be difficult. So we as ADOS have identified how they have been used to exploit and undermine our status in this society, and we are rightly so up in arms. They too are tired of the standards of being in the bush and being savages and having those caricatures of them, and they're standing against that. I see that as very similar. At the same time, of course, there's going to be clashes when it comes down to employment and ways of surviving. And so European British Africans are often used to show and depict our lives. Recently, a fantastic artist came forward and admitted that she and her career should have done better. She was in one of the Mission Impossible movies. She's in Westworld. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. Mm-hmm. She's come forward and admitted that she was portraying African Americans and African American women poorly. Now, after she's made her millions and gotten some rather esteem, especially from the series Westworld. But it's good that she's done that. We need more honesty like that. And in doing so, she admits where westernized European and American views of blackness, whether on the continent or in America, deserve to be challenged. At the same time, some of us are just happy to get a job and get noticed. And I know Beyonce's far beyond that. She's just being creative, but she should be challenged when she relies on those same European caricatures. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we also must challenge Africans when they're taking advantage of certain aspects of our lives. Like this artist, I just could not remember the name of. And she was famous for being in one of Oprah Winfrey's movies.
Thandie Newton?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Google.
She's apologized for that. And we need more of them apologizing for that. Not just foreign-born blacks, but we need American blacks apologizing for that. But I understand, brothers and sisters, you got to get a job, and that's where they have us.
My sense of why I wanted to tackle this is the hypocrisy in saying, don't show us in this light, but you're wearing the Adidas, the hip hop gear, and you're showing, so you're dressing and doing what Black Americans are doing. And I understand Beyonce is taking one aspect of your culture and showing that part, but it's what she deems positive images. She wants to show that, yes, the bush, Sahara in front of a fire is beautiful. And of course, fantasizing that you know, of us being kings and queens and, you know, not farmers and poor in Africa. And I understand them not, you know, that's just one aspect of us.
Yeah.
But the other aspect that you're saying that you are is Western and hip hop and American. So you want an American to stop showing you in the light, but you want to act and show that you are American. That's where the hypocrisy is coming. I don't understand that conversation. I find it hypocritical in this sense.
Well, I think you are absolutely correct. At the same time, this goes to your question last time, two episodes ago, where you said, is the white man to blame for everything? Well, at the root of this is the white man that has set these standards and set these levels of exploitation of which we borrow from, interchangeably our artists utilize to affect a change, because overwhelmingly the people that got the money because of the white man are white audiences. So when she does that, she's not doing it necessarily to appeal to Black African Americans or Black Africans on the continent, while she doesn't mind getting them. At the same time, her core constituency is going to be white people and their perceptions of us, thus the need and utilization of such caricature that undermines and binds us all, which we've got to extricate ourselves from. And we haven't consciously done so with consistency enough. And a lot of philosophers, a lot of African poets remarked on this over the years. Over the decades since the 60s, they were famous about these critical junctures of thought, speech, and action that undermines our creativity, our politics, our virtually every aspect, because of white domination that we must contend with.
Okay, well...
And I'm not letting either off the hook. I'm not letting Beyonce off the hook. I think she should be criticized for that.
Right.
At the same time, I also identify the hypocrisy that some, not all, but some Africans who are voicing their opinion because they have adopted the Americanized view, as you so easily pointed out. And that's where we are all, within the context of white domination, developing both our identities and our abilities to exert our will into the future. And we've got to be better at defining what that is, not based on caricatures introduced to us through the colonial period that we're still surviving on, as well as how we are going to define that new normal for Africans on the continent, as we become globalized, and African Americans. And I think, again, the ADOS movement is an answer for African Americans.
Yeah.
We need a series of art for that.
I think that social media in recent is just showing how different we are, and peeling back those deep-seated views that we have of each other. Mm-hmm. And some people are going to be hurt some people are going to be hurt behind it, and some people are going to just, not ignore, but not deal with it because it is hurtful to see that, oh wait, our cultures are different. I can't claim their culture even though they're claiming Western. Yeah. That's where the hypocrisy is coming in. It is, I
agree.
So when you have that level of, we're different, it doesn't mean that we have to be divided, in the sense that, yes, we both have to fight the white domination, as you call it, racism, and colonialism around the world. We're both fighting it. All melanated people around this globe is in some form or fashion is fighting it,
whether they realize it or not.
Exactly. So I think you have to still stand on, as Yvette would say, stand on your square, and stand with your tribe. You gotta put up the gates, as she would also say, and be affirmed in that. We're different. People from Ohio are different from people in Alabama or Louisiana. All across, people from the north side are different from the people on the east side. So even though we're different, doesn't mean we have to be mean and hateful and divided for another. If you are, and there's a reaction to your mean and hatefulness, that's just what it is. Like I said, in probably episode 1 or 2, if you come at us, we're going to respond the same way that you came. The feeling will be mutual. So if it's negative that you're coming at us with, even though, we're in the diaspora, we're going to give you what you give us. Vice versa, I'm sure. If ADOS is being rude and mean and whatever to an African from the continent or anywhere in the diaspora, they have every right to, say and defend themselves in a way that they see fit.
I look forward to the day, which is why I work with the ADOS movement. Less than 5 years, we're going to notice a change in our art.
In what way?
We won't have the binding force that obligates us to do the will of masters of these corporations in getting our stuff produced and distributed. We'll have more of the facility to do that ourselves. Therefore, will have freedom to create self-reflective, self-identified ideas about ourselves and project them into the world. We don't have now.
Well, we'll see. I still think our celebrities fantasize Africa to the point where,
and I agree,
they may incorporate those images. And like, for example, Cassie Lemons, I've really, looking at her body of work, she hates black men. She hates black men,
which is easy. And that's very American, white American. The Karens come from somewhere.
Yeah, and so I was just watching the film she produced. The Madam C.J. Walker movie. Finally got to see that, and I'm like, this lady hates black men. And so, yeah, the art can change, but the people that are producing know that I got to affirm white men and put down black men. I got to affirm black women and put down black men.
Within the context of depravity, because of the mechanizations of white domination racism. Reparations doesn't solve that, of course, because it'll still be in the mentality, but people with more resources will be able to exert their view of reality, which will show that black men are better than any racial group in America, spend more time with their children, married or not. That's powerful, but it's not widely known and then widely accepted and incorporated in people's thought processes because of white domination. We have our own news services that are fully funded and don't have to rely on total advertisement to white corporations, but the emerging black corporations, because of the infusions of reparations, art, and reports of our status and our true reality. Like I just gave you just one, there's several. Black men are more liberal than black women. That's not widely known, not widely, but we're subjected to this idea that we hate trans people. A lie. We're more liberal than black women, but that's not out there. So with reparations, we'll have more people with that knowledge and connection base that will be able to exert their will on politics and art, and new types of creative art in music or literature or whatever will also begin to emerge. It'll change a lot of things, which is another reason why it's resisted.
I hope so, because our society tends to listen to, when it comes to entertainment, listen to the voices of the young, and the young are intersectionality driven.
Yeah, currently within this context.
So in that, they're going to try to placate to a wide audience, trying to make sure everybody is happy instead of ADOS audience.
Yeah.
They're going to subset a lot of the they got to make sure every cast has a trans, a gay, a lesbian, a black woman, a black man, also the white token character.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be also the mixed race character. She has to be in there with the curly fine hair. And then you got it just
that we're told is fine.
I think I see the direction of our art going towards intersectionality, trying to represent everybody when they're all ADOS except the token white character. And that's a broad message, and it won't speak to our struggle. So I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, you have it right. Yeah, I don't disagree with you whatsoever, but we also agree that the intersectionality argument, which was originally meant just for businesses, not for politics or social issues, really, but it's been exaggerated at like identity politics. How it's being used now is not what it was intended. I listened to the person who created the term. She's very upset with how it's been used. So that aside, all this is happening within the context of white domination racism. And I'm saying it'll still be present after we get our check, but that context will change because we'll have our check. So you'll have the intersectional argument going against the standard of people's lives and what they're actually experienced, but they're now enriched. Will they fund such ventures? Will such ventures be appealing to them? No. And that means it'll have some life in it. They'll get some money at first, but over time they'll have to go to the wayside, because people who characteristically did not have money will now have money in this context and will be living those lives rather differently, where such arguments can't be appealing because it won't meet the reality. So another art will emerge from that.
Well, I'm hopeful, and I hope Beyonce learns her lesson.
No, she won't. It's too much money, because white people will buy into it and will love it.
I mean, she got a lot of, and of course she always gets anti-Beyonce type of coverage on social media, but this time
some call them haters,
right? But this time I don't think she was expecting Africans to react the way that they did.
Yeah, I agree.
And ADOS is just sitting back like, we tried to tell you, we different.
See, and that's another thing that, again, I loved Yvette and Tone for, because they tapped into this and gave words to this reality. They were ahead of the game. And so now all the African, I see it not less so much as hypocrisy, which it is. I see it more so as affirmation of our stance as ADOS.
Of course, yeah.
Because it's the reality.
Right.
It's always been the reality. So now we've just got people are already imitating our talking points. And here we got further affirmation as to our stance as being a particular aggrieved group that has a particular reality, and therefore should use that to thrust into the future.
And that's where the hypocrisy comes in, because for years they've been like, no, Yvette is wrong.
Yep.
Tone is wrong.
I agree.
They're dividing us. And now 2020.
Yep. That's what it is.
2020 says, oh, wait, I don't like what Beyonce is doing.
Yep. For
I
those
don't
reasons.
like that you're wearing kente cloth. I don't like that you're appropriating our culture.
Yep.
Black people.
And that's been our argument.
So
with regards
that's
to
where the hypocrisy is coming in.
I agree.
You know,
but I submit that not all the Africans we're
Of course,
saying
yeah.
either that. So
Yeah,
so those Africans are being hypocritical. There are some Africans who've been fantastic allies of ours. I've seen them on YouTube, and they would agree that we need to be particular here because they are particular there. So it's been always a mixed bag, but again, it's been a good foil to run against as we assert ourselves into the reality of the political space and the social media space. So these variations are always going to be out there. I try not to generalize, but at the same time, I recognize those generalizations are out there because they fuel people's thoughts.
And that's where the young intersectionality
There you
people
go. Yeah.
can't figure out why Africans are saying this, because aren't we the same?
There you go.
Aren't we in the same boat?
There you go.
They're getting their wake up call.
That's right.
ADOS has been trying to tell you
Yep.
that we are the same color, but we are different.
That's right.
And we're supposed to be different. We're living different lives.
Yeah.
We're living different realities. We're the same color, and we're living differently. I think this personality piece was great. We're getting good at this. We'll see how life in the diaspora on social media continues to entertain us. All right.
Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. You can also get more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda. Please visit ados101.com.
Hello, Articles of ADOS family. Lisa, Daud, thank you for asking for this. My name is David Smith. I'm calling out of Tampa Bay, Florida, specifically Pinellas Park. And I just want everyone to notice how ADOS are being played right now. The country has changed greatly since COVID and the uprisings following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. But ADOS aren't reaping any of the benefit. Let's be clear. I am for all people getting the rights due to them, period. But not as a substitute for dealing with America's anti-ADOS-ness. In the past weeks, we've seen LGBTQ plus rights upheld by the Supreme Court, Trump signing the executive order on the White House Hispanic Prosperity Initiative, DACA upheld and made a week one priority by the Biden-Bernie coalition, along with declawing ICE, the CBP, Border Patrol. We've seen women get promised the vice presidency, and Native Americans get to see their likenesses removed from sports teams, as well as half of Oklahoma. Also note that provisions specifically for undocumented immigrants and natives were written into the CARES Act. So that leads to the question. It begs the question, what did ADOS get? We got some statues removed, and we got the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the original Civil Rights Act, gutted. And this is the act that gave us the ability to sue for discrimination against ourselves. The cost of ADOS bodies suffering, indeed of common ADOS life, is not LGBTQ plus rights or Native American rights or Hispanic Latinx rights or women's rights. The cost is reparations now. Not now, but right now. It is important not to conflate the ADOS experience with anyone else's because we are unique and we must be dealt with specifically. America can't throw HR 40 into funding the police at us as a substitute for forgetting it, as a way to forget its debt owed to the people whose families endured American chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. Reparations are only the beginning to healing America, not the end goal. It has to be done first if America is to begin tackling the bottom castness of ADOS in earnest. Thank you very much.
Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
American companies facing pressure to reveal data on diversity of employees. From the publication Insurance General, author Ross Kerber and Simon Jessup. American companies are coming under increasing pressure from investors to publicly disclose information about diversity among employees in the wake of nationwide protests against racial discrimination. Many executives have pledged to champion equality in response to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations across the United States and beyond. The goal of global investors increasingly focused on social and governance issues is to gain a common metric on racial diversity to compare companies and hold them to account on their pledges, building on a drive to improve gender equality. The good news, they say, is that U.S. firms with more than 100 employees already gather such data for the federal government annually via a form known as the EEO-1, along with gender information. However, the data is confidential and companies are not required to publicly release it, with some arguing it does not accurately capture the structure of their businesses. Only 32 companies in the Russell 1000 make the information public, according to researcher Just Capital, either via the form itself or through detailed summaries. The EEO-1 is not the holy grail, but it's an excellent starting point, said John Struer, Chief Executive of Calvert Research and Management, an investment firm pressing executives to publicly disclose the data. Once companies begin releasing information, it would create competition to improve diversity, he said. I graded this article okay. Once again, American businesses plan to continue to use open-ended definitions like diversity and minority. And if their target is to increase Black ADOS employees, the language and effort needs to be clear. Up next,
from the publication, The New York Times, entitled, As Mayor of Minneapolis, I Saw How White Liberals Block Change. Tagline, But this revolutionary moment is inviting us to be a part of the solution. Author Betsy Hodges. Democrats have largely led big and mid-sized cities for much of the past half century. Yet the gaps in socioeconomic outcomes between white people and people of color are by several measures at their worst in the richest, bluest cities of the United States. How could this be? Because high-profile cultural conservatives ask this question so disingenuously. White liberals have generally brushed aside this reality rather than grappled with its urgency. There's now a danger that this sidestepping will continue, even after a national evaluation of racism since the brutal police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. As the mayor of Minneapolis from 2014 to 2018, as a Minneapolis City Council member from 2006 until 2014, and as a white Democrat, I can say this. White liberals, despite believing we are saying and doing the right things, have resisted the systemic changes our cities have needed for decades. These efforts make us feel better about racism, but fundamentally change little for the communities of color whose disadvantages often come from the hoarding of advantage by mostly white neighborhoods. Nowhere is this dynamic of preserving white comfort at the expense of others more visible than in policing. Whether we know it or not, white liberal people in blue cities implicitly ask police officers to politely stand guard in predominantly white parts of town, where the downside of bad policing is usually inconvenience, and to aggressively patrol the parts of town where people of color live, where the consequences of bad policing are fear, violent abuse, mass incarceration, and far too often death. I graded this article excellent for the same reasons that Yvette informs us how whites lie openly or by omission about their wealth status. White liberals have lied about their true intentions when it comes to their leadership in cities where Black ADOS have a noticeable presence. For this rare moment, some honesty. And next,
I'm a direct descendant of Thomas Jefferson. Take down his memorial. Tagline, Monticello is shrine enough for a man who wrote that all men are created equal and yet never did much to make those words come true. From the publication The New York Times, author and writer Lucian K. Truscott IV. When my brother Frank and I were boys visiting our grandparents at their home in Virginia, We used to heckle our grandmother until she would drive us into town so we could visit the Smithsonian Museum on the mall. We were surrounded by the history of Thomas Jefferson when we made those visits to our grandparents. We would drive down to Charlottesville with our grandmother to visit our great aunts and our great grandmother, and they would take us up the mountain to Monticello and drop us off to play in the house and on the grounds. They treated Monticello like it was the family home because, in a way, it was. They were great-granddaughters of Jefferson. They had been born and grew up only a few miles away at a family plantation called Edgehill. I guess that's why my brother and I, the great-grandsons, took the Jefferson Memorial for granted. We had his ancestral home as a playground. It was where all of our great-grandparents and great-aunts and great-uncles were buried, and where one day we were told we would be buried too. We didn't need the Jefferson Memorial. Monticello was enough. It's still enough. In fact, as a memorial to Jefferson himself, it's almost perfect. And that is why his memorial in Washington should be taken down and replaced. Described by the National Park Service as a shrine to freedom, it is anything but. I graded this article good. And up next,
from the publication Truth Out, entitled Racism of Policing Resulted in the Torture and 18-Year-Old Incarceration of My Son, by the author Rosemary Cade. When I first started sharing the story of my son's unjust 18-year incarceration, I felt confident that many people, particularly white people and people with political power, would not care at all about the situation of a black woman and her son. I still fear this will be the case over the long term. But in this moment, following the horrific police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and others, people across the country seem to be listening as never before and open to the possibility that our police forces and criminal legal systems are fundamentally flawed, or else working for the purpose they were designed for, to incarcerate black people. Antonio Porter, my son, has endured the violence of the policing and prison systems for much of his life. It's unlikely that any white man would have been sent to prison on the basis of the flimsy evidence secured against Antonio through illegal means. First, my son was not promptly read his Miranda rights and was not properly provided with an attorney. Second, and probably the most upsetting factor in his case, is that the Chicago Police Department's main witness was a 16-year-old child who was physically coerced by the police into identifying my son as the murderer. We later learned that while physically torturing the child, the police would incessantly place a photo of my son in his face until he broke down and told the police what they wanted to hear. The child was badly injured, and at my son's court hearing, he showed up wearing a sling to support his arm. Third, there is no DNA evidence tying my son to the crime. Fourth, eyewitnesses who were coerced into testifying against Antonio have recanted their testimony. Across the country, people are finally understanding what many black people have been saying all along, that the problem of police violence is systemic. Yet police killings aren't the only ways in which police are destroying black lives. Across the country, police are arresting and incarcerating people and sentencing them to death by incarceration en masse. I graded this article excellent. It was refreshing to hear a parent recount her family's very American horror show for ADOS, as well as the tragedy of being among the black targeted in America. And next,
letter to the editor. Are reparations the answer to our racial conflict? From the publication Daily Times, author and writer Ken Darrow Swarthmore. Politicians with progressive far-left ideology have expressed support for using reparations to redress long-standing grievances against black Americans by the white majority. Well, maybe the idea is not so far-fetched if we define reparation to include non-monetary giveaways. After all, the observation that black Americans have suffered economic and social injustice and inequality is undeniable. The question is, what can we and what should we do to try and at least partially remedy this? There is an old adage that rings true when considering our options. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Give a man a fishing rod and you feed him for a lifetime. A one-time payment to rightfully aggrieved black people would temporarily help them, but long-term solve nothing. It might be far better to allocate federal budget funds to help redress the gross inequality and inferior access that many black people have to high quality education, mental and physical health, and employment resources. That is, to help provide them with a better fishing rod rather than merely a fish. I graded this article okay. I can see the writer is grappling with reparations and what it would look like, but the ADOS ask for reparations does include a check and a black agenda with ongoing programs and initiatives that continue after money is received. So the writer and others that feel the same way need to know you don't have to cherry pick it. We're already asking for a check and the program. And up next,
from the publication New York Post, titled COVID-19 patient was black and paralyzed, so doctors decided his life was worth saving. Entitled COVID-19 patient was black and paralyzed, so doctors decided his life wasn't worth saving. From the author Charles Comsey. Last month, a disabled 46-year-old African-American man was euthanized without his consent or that of his wife, but rather than exploding amid our racial justice moment, the story hardly yielded a peep from those who control our national discourse. In 2017, Michael Hickson suffered a brain injury that left him paralyzed. Still, he was able to enjoy many activities, having books read to him, listening to music, answering trivia questions. Then Michael contracted COVID-19 and was admitted to St. David's Medical Center of South Austin, Texas. A disagreement over his care led to medical decision-making being taken away from his wife and given to the state and his medical team. As the recording shows, Melissa, his wife, still wanted Michael to be treated aggressively. The doctor insisted aggressive treatment wouldn't help him improve, and right now his quality of life, he doesn't have much of one. Melissa was taken aback. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Because he's paralyzed with a brain injury, he doesn't have quality of life?" "Correct," the doctor flatly replied. Melissa tried to respond, but the doctor had had enough. "I don't mean to be frank or abrasive, but at this point, we are going to do what we feel is best for him along with the state. And this is what we decided. If you care about racial justice, remember Michael Hickson. Say his name. Tell his story." I graded this fair. Good that the article is identifying how a hospital can make the arbitrary choice to end the lives of blacks. Poor because it doesn't take long to reason or realize that this is a far-reaching practice across America and tragic outcomes for black ADOS, which is not ventured by the article. 90 to 100,000 patients die annually due to infections acquired while getting health assistance while in hospitals. It would be great to get a racial breakdown of those numbers. Virtually a COVID-19 every year, yet no crisis. And next,
race in American politics. What will come of the gathering call for action? From the publication The Washington Post, author Dan Balls. The protests that followed the killing of Floyd have been described as an inflection point for the country. The conclusion may be premature given how deeply embedded structural racism is in America's history and culture, and how fractured and polarized its political system is. But when 2 in 3 Americans now say they support the Black Lives Matter movement, when thousands upon thousands of Americans march in the streets of big cities and small towns, when the National Football League reverses its position on players kneeling during the national anthem, when Mississippi eliminates the Confederate symbol from its flag, there seems little question that for now there is a materially different moment. Under President Trump, who has used racist messaging continually as president and before, Republicans are ill-positioned to respond fully to the moment that has arisen this summer. The party is captive to his rhetoric and actions, which exacerbate rather than reduce tensions. A part of the GOP coalition has moved in a more progressive direction on issues of race, but overall the party is on the wrong side of public opinion and stymied as to how far it can go. Democrats are more unified and eager to show they hear the chants from the streets, but they also face more intense pressure from Black Americans, who are the party's most loyal constituency. A significant gap remains between the activist community, especially young activists, that has led the protests and pushed public opinion, and a Democratic establishment now led by former Vice President Joe Biden that has been cautious in its commitments beyond police reform. I graded this article very good and worth reading. Up next,
from the broadcast, WWMT, Channel 3, CBS News, West Michigan, entitled Former Kalamazoo Central Wide Receiver Catches 3-Year-Old Boy Falling from Burning Balcony. From the writer, Andy Pepper. Former Kalamazoo Central wide receiver Philip Blanks caught a 30-yard touchdown pass on the final play of the game to beat arch-rival Loyal Norrix in 2009. For the last 11 years, that catch was by far the biggest in his life, until Friday, July 3, 2020, when the retired U.S. Marine made a diving catch of a 3-year-old boy who was dropped from the balcony of a burning third-floor apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. The 28-year-old Blanks said he was up early to go work out with a friend who lived next door to the apartment when he heard the screaming, and without hesitation raced over to catch a young child he says was twirling like a helicopter as he fell through the air. I've graded this article good. And next,
we have an article shared by Ralph Hickey in our Facebook group. Thank you, Mr. Hickey. It's entitled, Where Have All the Black Men Gone? Tagline, there's a gender imbalance in many African American neighborhoods. Mass incarceration is largely to blame. From the publication governing.com, author Mike Mashiag. Something is demographically amiss in parts of eastern DeKalb County, just outside of Atlanta. In several predominantly African American neighborhoods, there are only about 3 black men for every 5 black women under age 65. That sort of gender imbalance reflects a number of factors, primarily mass incarceration and high mortality, and is present in hundreds of communities across the country. Nationally, the Census Bureau counts 88 black men adults for every 100 black women, while the ratio for whites is more equal, 97 men for every 100 women. The single biggest driver behind the absence of many black men is mass incarceration. A few academics have held up ratios of black men to women as a proxy for incarceration. Despite recent declines in prison populations, disparities remain massive. African American males are imprisoned in state and federal facilities at 6 times the rate of white men, and about 25 times that of black women, according to figures from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Black men, underrepresented in the overwhelmingly majority of neighborhoods, are instead heavily concentrated in relatively few places, and those tend to be home to prisons. I graded this article okay, because most news on missing black men is they know the cause, but no one is interviewed on what needs to change and be fixed and who is going to fix it. Free our men out of your unjust prisons, let them go and give them reparations and support. Let the nonviolent, non-bail having prisoners go. It's that simple. Also commenting on this article, Maria Withers from the Facebook group. Her solution was, and I quote, "We need pure reparations and federal protections under the law so our black men don't get unjust jail sentences. Some getting 5 to 15 and more if they get in trouble while in prison, which you can't avoid if you don't want to be somebody's bitch boy. While white people are getting licensed to sell marijuana and making millions of dollars." We agree.
And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website.
Time now for the main event.
Our main event this episode was shared with us through our Facebook group by Ralph Hickey, once again sharing with us news important to ADOS life. In this week's main event, we will interview the article from the publication, Reuters, entitled Special Report, Thousands of U.S. Judges Who Broke Laws, Oaths Remain on the Bench. Author Michael Behrens, John Schiffman. Lisa will ask the questions. I will give the answers.
First, let's start with you, Judge. Judge Hayes, what misconduct were you accused of?
I once sentenced a single mother to 496 days behind bars for failing to pay traffic tickets. The sentence was so stiff it exceeded the jail time Alabama allows for negligent homicide.
And what happened to that mother?
Marquita Johnson, who was locked up in April 2012, says the impact of her time in jail endures today. Johnson's 3 children were cast into foster care while she was incarcerated. One daughter was molested, state records show. Another was physically abused. Judge Hayes took away my life and didn't care how my children suffered. said Johnson, now 36. My girls will never be the same. They had a nickname for me, the woman with all the days, Johnson said. There were people who had committed real crimes who got out before me.
Were you investigated?
In 2016, the state agency that oversees judges charged me with violating Alabama's Code of Judicial Conduct. According to the Judicial Inquiry Commission, I broke state and federal laws by jailing Johnson and hundreds of other Montgomery residents too poor to pay fines. A judge since 2000. I admitted in court documents to violating 10 different parts of the state's Judicial Conduct Code. One of the counts was a breach of a judge's most essential duty, failing to respect and comply with the law.
Did your misconduct result in any consequences?
Despite the severity of the ruling, I wasn't barred from serving as a judge. Instead, the Judicial Commission and I reached a deal. I, as a former Eagle Scout, would serve 11-month unpaid suspension. Then I would return to the bench.
Would you say that was a slap on the wrist?
Until I was disciplined, I never thought I was doing something wrong.
After returning to the bench, did your behavior change?
This week, I am set to retire after 20 years as a judge. In a statement to Reuters, Hayes said, I was very remorseful for my misdeeds.
Well, that wasn't the question, but okay. Writers, let's get back to you. What does the community most affected say about Judge Hayes' misconduct?
Community activists say his departure is long overdue. Yet the decision to leave, they say, should never have been his to make, given his record of misconduct. He should have been fired years ago, said Willie Knight, pastor of North Montgomery Baptist Church. He broke the law and wanted to get away with it. His sudden retirement is years too late.
Writers, what has your investigation also found?
Hayes is among thousands of state and local judges across America who were allowed to keep positions of extraordinary power and prestige after violating judicial ethics rules or breaking laws they pledged to uphold.
What types of ethics violations?
Judges have made racist statements, lied to state officials, and forced defendants to languish in jail without a lawyer, and then return to the bench, sometimes with little more than a rebuke from the state agencies overseeing their conduct.
Okay, please go into more detail about your findings.
In the first comprehensive accounting of judicial misconduct nationally, Reuters reviewed 1,509 cases from the last dozen years, 2008 through 2019, in which judges resigned, retired, or were publicly disciplined following accusations of misconduct.
That's a lot of cases. How are so many judges able to get away with so much misconduct?
In addition, reporters identified another 3,613 cases in which states disciplined wayward judges but kept hidden from the public key details of their offenses, including the identities of the judges themselves.
So the public doesn't know that judges are committing crimes?
Correct. 9 of every 10 judges were allowed to return to the bench after they were sanctioned for misconduct.
Can you list a few crimes that judges are committing?
They include a California judge who had sex in his courthouse chambers, once with his former law intern and separately with an attorney, a New York judge who berated domestic violence victims, and a Maryland judge who, after his arrest for driving drunk, was allowed to return to the bench provided he took a breathalyzer test before each appearance.
So no disciplinary action occurred?
Findings reveal an excessively forgiving judicial disciplinary system, said Stephen Gillers, a law professor at New York University who writes about judicial ethics. Although punishment short of removal from the bench is appropriate for most misconduct cases, Gillers said the public would be appalled at some of the lenient treatment judges get for substantial transgressions.
Without knowing the outcomes of these disciplinary actions, for all we know, nothing is happening. Do you have more examples of misconduct and leniency?
In Indiana, 3 judges attending a conference last spring got drunk and sparked a 3 a.m. brawl outside a White Castle fast food restaurant that ended with 2 of the judges shot. Although the state Supreme Court found the 3 judges had discredited the entire Indiana judiciary, each returned to the bench after a suspension.
So how can we trust a judge or a system that is supposed to be fair with this type of activity going on?
Judicial misconduct specialists say such behavior has the potential to erode trust in America's courts and, absent tough consequences, could give judges license to behave with impunity.
When people think about criminal justice, they often think police, but who is the gatekeeper of that system?
State and local judges draw little scrutiny even though their courtrooms are the bedrock of the American criminal justice system, touching the lives of millions of people every year. The country's approximately 1,700 federal judges hear 400,000 cases annually. The nearly 30,000 state, county, and municipal court judges handle a far bigger docket, more than 100 million new cases each year, from traffic to divorce to murder.
Who is overseeing all these judges?
Each U.S. state has an oversight agency that investigates misconduct complaints against judges. Usually, judicial commissions cannot change verdicts. Rather, they can investigate complaints about the behavior of judges and pursue discipline ranging from reprimand to removal. Few experts dispute that the great majority of judges behave responsibly, respecting the law and those who appear before them. Others disagree. They note that the clout of these commissions is limited, and their authority differs from state to state. To remove a judge, all but a handful of states require approval of a panel that includes other judges. As a result, the system tends to err on the side of protecting the rights and reputations of judges, while overlooking the impact courtroom wrongdoing has on those most affected by it.
And just how many people are being affected by this misconduct?
The examination found at least 5,206 people were directly affected by a judge's misconduct. The victims cited in disciplinary documents ranged from people who were illegally jailed to those subjected to racist, sexist, and other abusive comments from judges in ways that tainted the cases. The number is a conservative estimate.
Is anyone investigating these judges and all their possible victims?
In Pennsylvania, the state examined the convictions of more than 3,500 teenagers sentenced by 2 judges. The judges were convicted of taking kickbacks as part of a scheme to fill a private juvenile detention center.
Oh yes, we discussed those judges in the previous episode. Go ahead, continue.
In 2009, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court appointed senior judge Arthur Grimm to lead a victim review, and the state later expunged criminal records for 2,251 juveniles. In another review underway in Ohio, state public defender Tim Young is scrutinizing 2,707 cases handled by a judge who retired in 2018 after being hospitalized for alcoholism. Also, Case Western Reserve University, whose students are helping identify victims, compared the work to current investigations into police abuse of power. You see one case and then you look to see if it's systemic, he said.
Which state would you say is among the worst offenders of leniency?
Most states afford judges accused of misconduct a gentle kind of justice. Perhaps no state better illustrates the shortcomings of America's systems for overseeing judges than Alabama. As in most states, Alabama's 9-member Judicial Inquiry Commission is a mix of lawyers, judges, and lay people. All are appointed. Their deliberations are secret, and they operate under some of the most judge-friendly rules in the nation. Alabama's rules make even filing a complaint against a judge difficult. The complaint must be notarized. Complaints about wrongdoing must be made in writing. Those that arrive by phone, email, or without a notary stamp are not investigated. Although senders are notified why their complaints have been summarily rejected, anonymous written complaints are shredded. These rules can leave lawyers and litigants fearing retaliation, Commission Director Jenny Garrett noted in a response to written questions. It's a ridiculous system that protects judges and makes it easy for them to intimidate anyone with a legitimate complaint, said Sue Bell Cobb, Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court.
So it seems Alabama judges are above the law.
In most states, commission staff members can start investigating a judge upon receiving a phone call or email, even anonymous ones, or after learning of questionable conduct from a news report or court filing. In Alabama, staff will not begin an investigation without approval from the commission itself, which convenes about every 7 weeks. By rule, the commission also must keep a judge who is under scrutiny fully informed throughout an investigation. If a subpoena is issued, the judge receives a simultaneous copy, raising fears about witness intimidation. If a witness gives investigators a statement, the judge receives a transcript.
How is that remotely fair? Do the same rules and laws not apply to judges?
If judges think it's fair and appropriate to investigate others for crimes or misconduct without providing those subjects or targets with copies of witness statements and subpoenas, why don't judges think it's fair to investigate judges in the same way? Alabama judges also are given an opportunity to resolve investigations confidentially. Interviews and a review of Alabama Commission records show the Commission has met with judges informally at least 19 times since 2011 to offer corrective guidance. The identities of those judges remain confidential, as does the conduct that prompted the meetings. Not every violation warrants discipline, Commission Director Garrett said.
I can't help but think that these lenient disciplinary actions in Alabama are built out of Jim Crow laws in the South.
Montgomery, Alabama has a deep history of racial conflict, as reflected in the clashing concepts emblazoned on the city's Great Seal, cradle of the Confederacy, and birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement. As was common throughout the South, the city was the site of lynchings of black men, crimes now commemorated at a national memorial based here. Police arrested civil rights icon Rosa Parks here in 1955 for refusing to give up her seat on a city bus to a white passenger.
Let me guess. Most people coming before these judges with misconduct are black.
Today, about 60% of Montgomery's 198,000 residents are black. U.S. Census records show. Even so, black motorists account for about 90% of those charged with unpaid traffic tickets.
So Judge Hayes, back to you. What type of violent crimes cases came before you that needed such tough sentencing?
Examination of court records found much of my work in municipal court involved traffic cases and the collection of fines, and the majority of the people who come before the court are black.
But race has nothing to do with it?
City officials have said that neither race nor economics have played a role in police efforts to enforce outstanding warrants, no matter how minor the offense.
I find that hard to believe. How are these black citizens winding up in your court, sir?
In April 2012, Marquita Johnson was among them. Appearing before me Wednesday morning, the 28-year-old single mother pleaded for a break. Johnson had struggled for 8 years to pay dozens of tickets that began with a citation for failing to show proof of insurance. She had insurance, she said, but when she was pulled over, she couldn't find the card to prove it. Even a single ticket was a knockout blow on her minimum wage waitress salary. In addition to fines, the court assessed a $155 fee to every ticket. Court records show that police often issued her multiple tickets for other infractions during every stop, a practice some residents call stacking. I told Judge Hayes that I had lost my job and needed more time to pay, she recounted.
And your response to that request, Judge Hayes, was what?
By my calculation, Johnson owed more than $12,000 in fines. I sentenced Johnson to 496 days in jail. I arrived at that sentence by counting each day in jail as $25 towards the outstanding debt. A different judge later determined that Johnson actually owed half the amount calculated by myself, and that I had incorrectly penalized her over fines she had already paid. To shave time off her sentence, Johnson washed police cars and performed other menial labor while jailed.
And that was a fair sentence to you? For struggling families in your community, that was fair?
I generally found pleas of poverty hard to believe. With my years of experience, I can tell when someone is being truthful with me. Call it a gut instinct.
Writers, what course of action can citizens use to override Judge Hayes' gut instincts?
The law demands more of a judge than a gut call. In a 1983 landmark decision, Bearden v. Georgia, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that state judges are obligated to hold a hearing to determine whether a defendant has willfully chosen not to pay a fine. According to the state's Judicial Oversight Commission, Judge Hayes did not make any inquiry into Ms. Johnson's ability to pay, whether or non-payment was willful.
Ms. Johnson spoke briefly about how this sentence affected her family. What happened to them, and how long did Mrs. Johnson serve in total?
From jail, I prayed to return to my daughters, Johnson said. I was sure that someone would realize that Hayes had made a mistake. She said her worst day in jail was her youngest daughter's 3rd birthday. From a jail telephone, she tried to sing Happy Birthday, but slumped to the floor in grief. Johnson was freed after 10 months in jail. She learned that strangers had abused her 2 older children. One is now a teenager. The other is in middle school. My kids will pay a lifetime for what the court system did to me, Johnson said.
I'm sure this experience gave Judge Hayes a chance to reconsider giving these sentences.
6 months after Johnson's release, Hayes jailed another single black mother, Angela McCullough, then 40, had been pulled over driving home from Faulkner University, a local community college where she carried a 3.87 grade point average. As a mother of 4 children, including a disabled adult son, she had returned to college to pursue her dream of becoming a mental health counselor. Police ticketed her for failing to turn on her headlights. After a background check, the officer arrested McCullough on a warrant for outstanding traffic tickets. She was later brought before Hayes. "I can't go to jail," McCullough recalled, pleading with the judge. "I'm a mother. I have a disabled son who needs me." Hayes sentenced McCullough to 100 days in jail to pay off a court debt of $1,350, court records show. Her adult son, diagnosed with schizophrenia, was held in an institution until her release. She was freed after 20 days, using the money she saved for tuition to pay off her tickets, she said. "Jail was the darkest chapter of my life," McCullough said, "a place where the devil was trying to take my mind. Today, she has abandoned her pursuit of a degree. I don't think I'll ever be able to afford to go back."
This sounds like scenarios I've heard about all over the country.
A clear sign that something was amiss in Montgomery courts came in November 2013, when a federal lawsuit was filed alleging the city judges were unlawfully jailing the poor. The lawsuits detailed practices similar to those that helped fuel protests in Ferguson, Missouri, after a white police officer killed a black teenager in 2014. In a scathing report on the origins of the unrest, the U.S. Department of Justice exposed how Ferguson has systematically used traffic enforcement to raise revenue through excessive fines, a practice that fell disproportionately hard on black residents. Montgomery is just like Ferguson. In Montgomery, everybody knew that the police targeted black residents, and I sat in Hayes' court and watched him squeeze poor people for more money, then toss them in jail where they had to work off debts with free labor to the city.
With all the scrutiny of Judge Hayes' misconduct, what corrective action did the city officials and the commission take?
A few months after Judge Hayes' suspension ended, his term as a municipal judge was set to expire. So the Montgomery City Council took up the question of the judge's future on March 6, 2018. On the agenda of its meeting, whether to reappoint Hayes to another 4-year term. Hayes wasn't in the audience that night, but powerful supporters were. The city's chief judge, Milton Westry, told the city that Hayes and his colleagues have changed how they handled cases involving indigent defendants, since we learned a better way of doing things.
So they just promised with a cherry on top that they would do things different on their own? How did that go over with the citizens?
Residents that addressed the council were incredulous that the city would consider reappointing Hayes. Jones, the community activist, reminded council members that Hayes had pleaded guilty to violating the very laws he was sworn to uphold. The city council voted to rehire Hayes to a 5th consecutive term. Marquita Johnson said hiring Hayes back to the bench was a slap in the face to everyone. It was a message that we don't matter.
My last question, the same as the writers asked, goes to you, Judge Hayes. Do you regret any of your sentences?
On Thursday, I will retire from the bench. I think maybe I could have been more sympathetic at times. Sometimes you miss a few.
Well, that completes this interview. Listeners, you can read this full article on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned. We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articlesofados. So how do we feel about this article?
Atrocious. Absolutely atrocious. When I saw it, I I sort of glossed over it thinking, judges doing everything from inappropriate sexual things, which this didn't happen to cover, but they're really well known for that, as well as, the typical racist stuff. Definitely took it for granted, but going through it like that, it's heart-wrenching, it's devastating, it's ADOS life right there. I mean, that's a prime example of ADOS life. And as we were going along with it, I was thinking Ferguson, the Justice Department's conclusion as to what it was. It was really extortion by way of the legal entities of the time to force poor people, particularly the black poor, into levels of subjugation, whether it be financial abilities just to stay afloat or subjecting them to long prison sentences so they could work it off in prison, which is another form of slavery. It's automatic, conditional, institutional racist slavery. Mm-hmm. That's at the root of all this.
I think for many of us here in America, when we hear criminal justice reform, we think policing. Yes, that is a major part of criminal justice reform, but I don't think anybody is equating that or see the other side of that, and that is the judges and the prosecutors and sometimes the district attorneys in a lot of these cities. But judges have a whole lot of power, more so than the police, in how they affect people's lives. Number one, the police can arrest, but the judges are the ones that determine if you stay in jail or you go free, or your freedom. So that's our judicial system in a sense. So when there is a lot of misconduct on that side, yes, the most heinous ones, the ones where they're seen on, the evening news when the judges are driving drunk, or alcoholism at the court, judges showing up to court drunk. Unless you see, we rarely hear about judge misconduct. As you can see in the article, a lot of times the misconduct of judges are kept confidential in a lot of these states and cities. So you're rarely going to hear about a judge that's breaking the law. And that's, to me, is being above the law. And you can see how it affects black ADOS everyday life, where you can take somebody that owes a lot of money for tickets, traffic tickets, and give them as much time as somebody that committed murder. That is unequal justice under the law, in my opinion. I want to speak to the confidentiality of the misconduct of these judges. A judge can make the rules at what goes on and what doesn't go on in their courtroom. So number one, you're already setting up power dynamic that is above the law. The reason why I chose this article that Ralph shared is because I'm sick and tired of judges getting away with wrongdoing, misconduct, and blatant racism in America. And police are not the only ones that are a part of the criminal justice system that needs reform. Our criminal judges need to be removed or sent to jail themselves.
I was tempted to utilize one of the articles in Rapid News last episode that focused on prosecutors need to be brought into this discussion. So you just mentioned the gambit. We call it systemic racism, or other people, sociologists, call it institutional violence. I call it institutional racist violence. These elements you just focused on in terms of the confidentiality that these judges get to operate in, it's the same type of mechanism that's used to hide police misconduct that hides prosecutor misconduct. So yes, we definitely need to focus on judges. We need to focus on prosecutors. We need to focus on police. And the police right now, because they're the front line function in this system, are the focus right now because they are causing all three, prosecutions and judicial decisions on the street, resulting in people's deaths. Mm-hmm. So we definitely should be upset, but we also need to take a step back and see the systemic nature of all this. That while tackling police misconduct by way of defunding them is totally inadequate, in my humble opinion, but it's an attempt to address the police action. At the same time, prosecutorial misconduct is also out there. That needs to be center stage. The whole system needs to be evaluated as for its efficacy, as for what it stands for, because I kept hearing that over and over again throughout this piece, this article. And then at the same time, we do know the problems, and the key problems are things like these sort of protections they get in terms of confidentiality. But we also need to connect it to what's happening system wide. And so a whole rehaul. So what am I saying? I hoped that after the judicial system determined that Ferguson was basically squeezing the black public dry, that there would have been a large scale attempt to evaluate all municipalities and how they were exerting justice. Because what has happened? Globalization has been happening drastically since the 1980s and 1990s. So how have municipalities, I remember hearing reports in the early 2000s, how small municipalities were having to file for bankruptcy. So what did other mid-level municipalities do? What do? They focus on draining the poor, particularly the black poor, dry, because America overall doesn't care what happens to the black poor and black people in general. So they were able to target us. And the system allowing them to target us was operated through police, operated through prosecutors, and operated through judges, creating a system of continued slavery, whether it be in the form of wage slavery outside the prison or inside the prison, having to work off your debts in prison, debtors' prisons. We've got Robin Hood all over again, with Shared Forest being the prosecutors, the police, and the judges' bed that they all rest in and rely on the steady flow of income through black bodies.
Yeah, and before we conclude, the part of the leniency really ticked me off, and that is that they're finding that judges are breaking the law, breaking their oath, doing criminal acts that they themselves are sending people to prison to. They're doing some of the same crimes. Yet judges are judging themselves, policing themselves, and determining that are innocent of their misconduct. So they're allowed to get off on a lot of times, or if they are found guilty, they're suspended. They're encouraged to retire. Or if they are found guilty, it's rare that they are removed from the bench. So guilty criminal judges are sitting on the benches judging people, judging black ADOS, judging the poor, judging people that can't afford to, for a private attorney, to get out of jail while they wait on their sentencing. They're judging these people and they're criminals themselves.
And what you just said there, I could have substituted the word prosecutor. I could have substituted the word police. It's systemic. So we go after the judge, we got to go after the prosecutors. We go after prosecutors, you got to go after police. We need to go after the whole system. The systems is worth being indicted and investigated thoroughly from top to bottom across the nation. Using these particular incidents, as egregious as they are, becomes piecemeal whack-a-mole approaches.
So that's where it's going to take a massive federal government overhaul of our system. Much like Joe Biden massively overhauled system with the crime bill, we're going to need something that size to tackle the criminal justice system massively, one broad stroke, not piecemeal like you just said. And it's going to have to be mandated, and it's going to have to be executed. And by that, it's going to need incentive. It's going to need to be incentivized, just like Joe Biden's crime bill was incentivized. You're going to have to fund your police departments and stop using the black poor to fund these police departments and these criminal justice systems. If you're going to have a court system, fund it and stop using extortion and wealth extraction from the black community or from the poor, which is predominantly the black ADOS.
And we've just been talking about that within the context of institutional criminal industrial complex. We need to go take the same mentality to the capital area construct, banking. For years, people have talked about the needs for banks to be evaluated and audited to determine their racial displays of interaction. We already know, just like we know in the criminal justice system, we already know we don't get the loans. We already know that we have adequate credit scores and still are denied. We already know. So they too have institutional mechanisms which allow them to get away with murder, economic murder. Same thing in the criminal justice system, although there it's more so our physical bodies that are murdered.
should we be asking for that reform at the same time that we're asking for the reparations? I believe on adosmoment.com we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so along with reparations, we're going to demand that there's criminal justice reform on that massive of a scale. It needs from top to bottom. But,
And that takes time. And the time that'll take, we can be awarded our legal justice claim till they get that stuff figured out, because that's the other half of it. We need definite protections and confirmed support as they manage their racism problem. It's their problem.
Yes.
So we need to be compensated for the debt they owe. And as they get their stuff together, we need to have enforced protections against the racism that this one article totally reveals and obliterates. Any argument that anybody could have in opposition, it's an obvious lie. It loses on merits from the beginning, as uttered from their mouths. Oh, this is a fair system. There is no way this is a fair system. And this is just one judge's story. As it's documented, there's several judges' stories. I submit it's
thousands.
not just thousands. It's not just thousands of judges' stories. It's thousands. It's millions of stories that are a part of the system of white domination racism.
All right, and that's it for today's main event in our commentary. Listeners, you can read this full article on our website in our show notes at articlesofados.com.
This week in #ADOS, we have a few tweets that we think are great to share with you. Up first, we have Alume at Bohemibaba. Reading history can be so frustrating. Post-Civil War, the South was bankrupt, yet homesteads weren't seized to pay debts. Plantation owners kept their land. And Georgia's state constitution forgave debts prior to 1865. White people have had countless affirmative action. #ADOS.
And number 2 is a thread from Proud Georgia Boy at Terrence Bailey Jr. I keep seeing people in certain circles talk about the divisiveness of ADOS, but I'm here to tell people what is not divisive is accountability and justice. The only people who find those things to be divisive are the very people who are being held accountable. ADOS forces those in the black empowerment space to not only be knowledgeable of the philosophies of giants like Malcolm, Martin, Marcus, and Kwame, but to pair those with modern works of Darity and Hamilton, Bergeron, and Shapiro. For example, no disrespect to anyone who fought for ADOS and the black diaspora during and before the civil rights era, but we have 60 years of data, academic works, laws, and experiences that have happened since. You can't just be well read up until the period of the 70s or even the 90s. This moment demands so much more. This moment forces us to come to terms with the realities of America and Black America with precision. I don't know if most know how mentally prepared you have to be to even begin to debate some of the things I see being debated on here. We can't afford to guess. We can't afford to be scattered. We can't afford to be distracted. We can't afford to be led by a boule talented 10th celebrity class. That's in part why we're here now. This is not a moment of cosplay activists. Do the work or move.
Number 3 from Andrea Diaz at Andy121. If you hate black men, you also hate black women. If you hate black women, you also hate black men. If you say you hate either, know that you too are working towards the annihilation of all black people. We are one. #ADOS.
And lastly, number 4 from Outside Delphia, replying to Son of Memphis. You must realize that white people really hate ADOS, and they reward others when they show they really hate ADOS too. That is the qualified immunity in the United States. There you have it, family. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list, see the show notes for today's episode, and to leave us a voice message to be featured on the show.
Now that you're family, we'd love it if you'd like our Facebook page and join our private Articles of ADOS group. This is where you can connect with other listeners, give feedback, and share articles you would like us to discuss. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. Until next time, family, stay safe, stay strong. Peace.